Greetings and salutations. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Kai, and welcome to another Z podcast. We are going to be doing a very interesting media deep dive and analysis. This is going to cover something that I don't usually cover, which is myself. I have been working on a undergraduate honors college thesis for I don't know how long, but for a while. And recently I had completed my thesis defense about 2 weeks ago. And I'm super excited to share more about that thesis and the results that I uncovered and really scrutinize my work, especially seeing as I have spent less amount of time than I would like to on that project due to a variety of reasons. And something that I've been saying on this channel for a very long time is like, hey, we need to apply. I don't like just talking about things and criticizing, and I think, coming correct with the criticism, but there is a gap. The application is as important as taking the criticism into account. How else would you actually be doing that without applying? So I wanted to take a moment to actually do that and look at my presentation. I had taken a look over my videos before doing that presentation and just thinking more about certain elements that I could incorporate into my presentation. And I hope that through the next, I think, 3 or so episodes, I'm going to try and really go through this bit, because the defense is probably about 50 minutes long. Really just see how I use those, what I could have done better. There's a whole host of things I can do better, and just to continue talking about how you, as the viewer, someone who's probably into media, someone who's probably into creating content or speaking or teaching others, can start using different techniques in their day-to-day work life. So let us get into it. My thesis talks about improvisation, and I think the intro to my thesis defense does a pretty good job of explaining what it's about, I hope. So I'm going to start it right here. Apologies for the quality of the video. I had kind of forgotten to bring a setup, you know. Thank goodness for friends and colleagues, they saved the day. But let's just look into basically the first 6 minutes of this, and that's what this episode is going to be about. Let's really pick apart and see exactly what I did here for this thesis defense. Okay, let me move this to front and center. Let me already spoiling this. It's funny. Okay, so when it comes to music, right, and my journey with music, this thesis kind of culminates that and puts that to like a formalized academic standard, because I've always had a problem, right? I've been making music for about 15 years, playing piano for about that time, and then after being classically trained for 7 and a little bit of jazz training for like 3, I ended up like improvising. I started creating music on my own. I did a lot of like music production stuff, and just integrating, just playing. And I didn't really understand why or how I was doing what I was doing. So immediately we are captured. We are pulled in. Something that I talked about in the TED Talk video, as well as probably a couple other videos, is the importance of hooking your. And the way I started this hook in particular was a story in the form of a problem that I personally had, creating that personal connection. When we had talked about long form analysis and for Apollo 94's Void Stranger video, that exemplifies this kind of storytelling narrative that pulls people quickly in. I wanted to continue that kind of point, and the first technique that I wanted to highlight I use is this like problem solution kind of orientation, which is very entrepreneurial, which is my major. Something I do want to point out as a criticism, though, is I wish that this moment, right? This moment where I accidentally like switched to a different slide, etc. Wish that I made that more comedic, and I wish that I called back to that at a later point, because that stifled my train of thought a little bit, and it definitely would have been fun to like make that a little quirk. But I think I did pretty good at moving on and recovering. You can even see just from my body language, like throughout the video, usually am nervous by moving around. I notice that my body is very much the measure of my nervousness, not my mind. So I am trying to always look for cues of like me feeling a little bit anxious. But at this point, my body language is pretty expressive. I'm open. I don't have my arms crossed or anything like that. I'm facing the crowd most of the time. I do look occasionally on my slides, but my body language is open and ready for action, ready for presentation. So let's continue.
I didn't really understand why or how I was doing what I was doing. I knew that I was really good at it, and I knew that people were generally pleased with it, but I didn't really know why the mechanics actually work. Now, jazz is very commonly known in the music sphere for being improvisatory and creating on the fly, but that's not the only culture that does that. As we can see, the Arabic and game-led improvisation aspect. So basically, what I'm trying to find out is how am I doing what I'm doing? How are people doing in general what they're doing? And how are cultures implementing something that's maybe a more foundational or per se higher level of understanding of improvisation?
So I'm trying to strategically talk about improv as a transformation of the status quo. And the way that I try and execute this from a mechanical how I actually conveyed that communicatively. I try to emphasize and pause on certain elements in my problem and really emphasize the specific nature of my conundrum of like, I don't really get the mechanics. It's not that I don't know what in the world I'm doing. It's I just don't understand the mechanics behind it, like the underlying. And me using gestures to show the different levels of what I'm trying to get to, it just reaffirms to the audience my overall point. I do think that overall, this part of my kind of problem statement could have been maybe concise, like goodness, condensed a little bit more, but having trouble with words all day today. Overall, I think that I did a pretty good job of elocution when it comes to dictating what my point was.
In their specific cultures. So to explore this topic, let me just go over an overview. Basically, I'm going to introduce what improvisation is so you can get a foundational understanding. I'm going to make an example. That's why I have the keyboard out to demonstrate a little bit of improvisation. We're going to talk about the framework that I'm using, go through the literature review, et cetera. But what I want to really highlight is the case studies. I have 2 case studies, and I will explain why I chose these particular cases. But these will allow for a beautiful result that can be used and distilled into actual usage, because I don't want to just write about this forever and then not give any application to it. So there's going to be teaching applications. There's going to be a result that is synthesized and beyond.
So I have no comments, no notes on this. But I just want to highlight that I wish that I had kind of just delivered the information a little bit more entertaining and also more engaged with the audience. I think I looked at the slide a little bit too much, and I didn't use the looking at the slide to like use my hands to point other than the case analysis. So that was something that I definitely, looking back, might need to work on tightening.
So jazz is dominating the world, but that's not the only place for improvisation, obviously. There are other cultures that improvise. And what is improvisation? Well, the framework that I'm using comes from a Swedish professor. His name is Jerstedt. And he talks about how improvisation is an individual and a collective musical activity, which it is always, though is always situated in a social musical context, is to a certain extent characterized by what? Real-time decision making. And this is very important. That's why I highlighted, underlined it, by the performance of that musical activity. So there's an aspect of, in that very moment when you're playing, that you're making a certain decision. And I find out that perhaps that's not actually the best way of putting this definition. And to kind of
So something that I loved was this moment where I did look at the slide, I read off the definition, I engaged with the material on the slide, which I thought was really important. You could tell by my intonation that I was pretty apt at creating that, again, storytelling type of narrative of like, we're going to find out, we're going to see, I have a problem and I'm searching for a solution. We're going to see what I found out. journey with me, explore. That kind of energy is, I think, what I pulled throughout this presentation.
Kind of demonstrate what improvisation is, I'm going to play something that's generally very famous, and then going to repeat that portion and improvise over it. And you'll see how it kind of evolves over time. This is a very common piece. Right, so that's Furley's. Most people know this. Now, if we improvise a little bit over that, so that obviously is completely different, but similar, but different. Why? How did I do that? Like that's the questions that I'm trying to ask and figure out, because that wasn't particularly jazzy, that was particularly classical, but it was something different.
So, show, don't tell. If I had to conclude this episode right at this moment, show, don't tell. Like, I was given this idea by actually one of the audience members that attended, a professor at FGCU. Excellent guy. And I had the idea already, but I just didn't think that it would be, like, I didn't want to pull out all the stops, but he encouraged me to pull out all the stops. And I was really happy that I did that, because just demonstrating clearly what improvisation is with something that people probably know or can easily familiarize themselves with just demonstrates, obviously, like, what's going on, because most people are going to question, how did he do that? You know, whenever you see a jazz performance, whenever you see an Arabic performance, whenever you see gamelan performance, wherever you see improvisation, even in comedians, improvised comedy troupes, like, um, all of that is confusing. Like, you just don't get it. And there is rhyme and reason. There is understanding as to how that works. But my problem is more nuanced than that. And that's what we're going to find as we continue this video. So I think that what took this introduction from, to next level was a variety of different things, right? We see the problem immediately. It has a personal connection. We are prepared to take that journey. Then after moving through that journey, we are giving more details about, okay, this is what we're expecting. I even allude to a few things about my results in the future that are going to happen, as well as clearly articulating, not only by voice, but also by demonstration, that, hey, this is what improvisation is, and this is a interesting, serious problem. And throughout, I am kind of trying to be as unabashed as possible. I really didn't want this to feel highbrow. I did not want this to feel like no one could understand. That's why most of my audience members are not musicologists or anything in related, even though this deals with musicology, ethnomusicology, and philosophy. I wanted to be able to communicate these ideas clearly, and these certain aspects allow me to develop that kind of connection with an audience that might not fully understand what's going on. And even myself, it helped me have some pinpoints as to how my presentation is going to go. Something that this brings up is my nature to improvise. Improvisation is kind of the whole point of this podcast. It's a little bit meta for me to be doing this. Most of these podcasts are one take, two takes. I have minimally invasive editing that just generally removes like filler words or large pauses, things of that nature. I mean, most of this is done with an hour of research and an hour of prep, and then that's it. I'm not really committing to deep analysis unless it's with a foreign work like the Oh Brother, I Am Troubled piece that took me a second to really gather. But even then, when I actually present to you, I am trying to keep the pressure and keep the standard high while improvising, while spontaneously coming up with every single word that I'm going to say. Sure, I look over and I have a few outlines. I have a few things that I'm referencing that I can, look back to. But most of what this whole podcast is about is just having this journey with me, and I literally force myself and the audience to go through that, and hopefully get better as time moves on. Improvisation is critical and crucial to the very basis of this channel, and I think that just goes to show and reflect the passion that's demonstrated in my defense of like how much I'm motivated by this idea. A few other things that I wanted to highlight was how personable you can be, but at the same time vague. That might help with presenting. Oftentimes, I think certain people can feel like being vulnerable and being open about their problems and etc. might lead to disaster because you're going to say too much, do too much, etc. And that's definitely understandable. But what I can tell you is you can show your problems, you can create the personal investment just by interacting with the content or by experiencing that moment. And it can be as simple as like, I'm really nervous right now, guys, but I'm going to, continue pushing through with this. I'm really excited about this idea. I've spent a lot of time and a lot of hardship and blood, sweat, and tears into this. That alone can get people to be like, let me hear this person out. Let me see what this person has to say. And that kind of opening and vulnerability doesn't have to take away from your privacy. Even then, if you want to reveal certain things, I did not talk about how music saved my life and how, a bunch of things that happened to me and how I really didn't have an outlet and, all of this. And you can if you want to, but I don't feel like it's necessary to elaborate. I'm not going to elaborate it on this channel either. But I didn't say those things, but it still created those connections. And privacy is important to me. And I know that with the rise of technology and all those kinds of things, it's quite out there. And doing this in an improvised, spontaneous manner is also quite out there. And it challenges those standards that I try to uphold, but nevertheless, we still get it done, right? But yeah, I think that vulnerability is something definitely to really captivate your audience. I'm going to play a little bit more of this. I didn't plan on continuing, but I think that just a little bit more, since I know what happened since I was there, might be cool.
And that's the question that I'm trying to answer, right? So let's discuss how this all gets started. Where is the basis of this? And we kind of get a little philosophical, so I'm going to make sure to explain this well. There is an aspect that St. Augustine in his Confession talks about, how there's time is paradoxical, and meaning that you are always going to reference yesterday as yesterday and tomorrow as tomorrow, and the present is always fleeting. The past is always in the past, and you can never be in the future. And when you say that the present moment is now, it just passed. So how can you ever experience time? So Ricoeur and Husserl aim to try and understand this contradiction. So they're saying, we want to apply this kind of idea to a structure called storytelling, which is a very common thing that we all do. Storytelling is how we make sense of this time constraint problem.
So something that I notice I say often is so. And I think that I need to work on that. I am sure that there's a variety of different other fanboys or correlating conjunctions that can be used to better connect my entrance into what I'm going to say. And another thing that I think that it's really important to highlight, that it's another criticism, is I explain this semi well. There's some nuance there that I didn't really touch on, and I think that there's a necessary evil that has to be taken up when presenting these kinds of things if you're not careful to restrain yourself. But I don't know. We could have done a lot better at articulating things if I had more time, I think.
It's an issue where now we can understand how human beings perceive the world. Everything a part of your life, it's usually a story, it's usually a memory that you have, because when you recall that memory, what happens? You're recalling the past, right? But it's in that present moment. But when you're telling it, you usually tell it differently each time, right? But then you know the end of the story. And people also are experiencing that as well, so it refigures their experience, which is how this mimesis process, which is what it's called, Jerstedt, the framework that I'm using, applied this to jazz and improvisation. It's the same thing. I'm going to give a really good analogy to kind of help understand that process. But I want to highlight that there's a warning of westernization. Obviously, using a framework or theory that is based in the West or in the East or against each other might remove some nuance, might remove some of the details. But because this theory is not in the more, I guess, hermeneutic level, it's now talking about the cognitive level of a neurology base, where it's the mind and how everyone expresses through that structure, all the details and nuance can remain. So there's no need to worry about that aspect.
So I'm going to stop it here. But I think that what really ties this all together is, I think, my energy with this thing. I think if I just monotonely went through like this whole entire section and didn't really give much like actual emphasizing of with my hands and my voice, God, it would have been a drag. I must say, it would have been a drag. And I think that that's for academic literature what has to be done in order to keep the audience enticed. And even the stack of papers that you see that are below my keyboard, to the right of the water bottle, that stack of papers was another thing told to me by a friend that I should really do to keep people's attention. And I love myself. I'm just like, it's great. It's so great. But yeah, I think that there's even like a comedic bit here, right?
What is this process? Don't be scared. I made this graph, so I know it. Basically,
Yeah. So like, I mean, throughout the whole video, I'm just being comedic. I think that that's something that has to be done as well to just keep the pace of things and to keep entertainment as well as to really emphasize. But overall, I really love this presentation and I will continue going through it in the next video. I definitely have a lot to work on still, but it's super exciting to finally apply some things and show that kind of application. I hope that you've enjoyed this so far. We will dive even deeper into the world of this thesis defense, unedited, uncut thesis defense, and see what more things are in store. Because this is it's a really interesting lens that I haven't covered of all the different pieces of media. Anyway, thank you for stopping by. Have a good one. This has been Z Podcast. Oh, like and subscribe. Okay, bye.